Okay, so welcome to Fast Forward Series 4, Season 4. I'm Nastassha, the Executive Head of SME and SOHO segment at Vodacom. I firstly do want to apologize to everybody that's joined for a bit of a late start. We are streaming from multiple parts in the country, and sometimes technology does let us down, but I promise we are still going to be really respectful of time. Just as a bit of a way of introduction, I think I'm quite new here. You guys would have previously met my colleagues, Hopelang, who presented the previous season. I'm actually new to the space, and my sole responsibility is to bring the best of what Vodacom has to offer to help you as entrepreneurs and business owners digitally transform your business to unlock the growth that you envision. So I look forward to partnering with you and journeying with you as we meet with various industry experts, learning from entrepreneurs like yourselves, and deep dives on topics like digital, data analytics, funding options, and more. So for a little bit about today, what we're going to be covering, we can't think about digital without thinking about cybersecurity. And since October is Cybersecurity Awareness Month, what better way to kick off a new season of Fast Forward than with a masterclass to simplify this relatively intimidating and complex topic. So here's why it's important for you as a small business owner. Since more businesses are shifting, taking businesses online, and obviously embracing technology solutions, we've seen a dramatic increase in cybersecurity attacks across all businesses, SMEs in particular. According to Lindy Comerford from the Cybersecurity magazine, 43% of cybersecurity attacks are aimed at small businesses. And from the small businesses that are obviously are, from a cybersecurity attack perspective, 60% of these businesses close their doors within the next 6 months. So the effect of a cybersecurity attack can be devastating for you and your small business, and can have significant reputational and financial impact. So if a recovery from a cybersecurity attack could take many hours and cost thousands of rands, it's important that we help you try and avoid any of those attacks going forward. So I have the privilege of being joined by my esteemed colleague, Garith Peck, the Executive Head of Cloud Security Portfolio at Vodacom. Do you want to say hi to our audience, Garith?
Good evening, everyone. It's really a privilege and an honor to be speaking to you tonight, to be sharing some insights into the world of cybersecurity. I promise you it's not daunting. We'll keep it as simplified as possible. Thank you very much.
Awesome. So just a little bit about Garith before he gets into our masterclass. Garith comes with more than 20 years worth of experience in ICT. Most of his time was spent in cybersecurity. So if there's anybody that's got the right expertise to help us with this discussion, it's definitely him, guys. Before joining Vodacom, Garith was a director of regional sales and key accounts at Beyond Trust Africa, which is a leader in privileged access management, empowering organizations to secure and manage their universe of privileges. Some of the key achievements throughout his career: he led the business for the entire Africa region, spanning sales, customer success, and channels at Beyond Trust. One of the key functions of his role was to be the cybersecurity evangelist, to promote awareness, advocate for the trends, best-of-breed solutions, and ethos to users, the general public, and the wider information security community. He also worked at Oracle, where he led the identity management and data security business. Not only did he develop the enterprise sales strategy and industry value propositions, but he was also responsible for the implementation of sales and marketing campaigns in South Africa and Sub-Saharan Africa. Now, I know in his introduction, a few of these words sound quite foreign: access management, identity management, and it all sounds very complex. But I promise by the end of this masterclass, you'll be comfortable with your new lingo. So before I hand over to Garith, just a couple of housekeeping rules, just to keep the session quite engaging and to allow us to connect with you guys after the session as well. Please use the chat function to post any comments and questions. If there are particular questions that you would like for us to try and answer during the session, please engage by voting for a question, because the questions that are most popular will obviously be responded to within and answered during our session. We also have a little bit of a poll to try and find out more about what some of the biggest challenges are in you making sure that your business is cybersecurity resilient. So tell us a little bit more about what some of the challenges are that you're facing. And just one thing that I also want to note as well is that this session is being recorded and will be available on our Vodacom V Hub site, which is a free knowledge and advice platform which we've created for you as small business owners to help you digitally transform your business. So let's get into why you guys are all here. Garith, do you mind telling us a little bit more about cybersecurity?
Thank you very much, Nastassha. So yes, I mean, so today we're going to be talking about cybersecurity from a simplified perspective. Now, cybersecurity as a practice is around defending computers, servers, mobile devices, any electronic systems, networks, and ultimately data from malicious attacks. It's also known as information technology security, or in some worlds it's electronic security. The term applies in a variety of contexts, from business to mobile to cloud computing, and can be divided in a few common categories. Now I'm going to be listing these categories in a very rudimentary way. So one of the things to note from a cybersecurity perspective is something called network security. Now, this is the practice of securing a computer network from intruders, whether these are targeted attackers or opportunistic malware. You also have something called application security. Now, this focuses on keeping software and devices free of threats. Now, a compromised application could provide access to the data that it was ultimately designed to protect. Now, successful security begins at the design stage and well before a program is actually deployed. You have another layer of security called information security. Now, this protects the integrity and the privacy of data, both in storage and in transit. Now, you'll see many of the data regulations point to this kind of level of security. You have operational security. This includes the processes and decisions for handling and protecting data assets, the permissions that the users have, who has access to what information within your environment. Now, in the realm of cybersecurity, one of the most important things that we also talk about a lot is around disaster recovery and business continuity, because this defines how an organization responds to a cybersecurity incident, or whether an event that causes a loss of operation or data. So disaster recovery policies dictate how organizations restore the operations and information to return it to the same operating capacity before the actual event. End-user education is also very important because the human element is probably one of the biggest fundamental impacts to cybersecurity. There's been studies done where they said that human error contributes to over 90% of some of these cybersecurity breaches. So in a nutshell, you know, the world of cybersecurity has evolved quite significantly. Now, the scale of the cybersecurity threat over the last few years has just grown. There's been a rapid increase in the amount of data breaches, and many of you that has been reading the news, South Africa has been highly impacted from this perspective as well. A risk-based security analyst firm basically revealed that a shocking 7.9 billion records have been exposed by data breaches in the first 9 months of 2019. Now, this figure has more than doubled from the previous year in 2018, and it has grown year on year. So no organization, no entity, no individual is immune from a cybersecurity breach. In the world of cybersecurity, we say things like not if, but when. You'll see medical services, retailers, public entities, all impacted by breaches, malicious criminals, whether it is, and there's a variety of threat actors, which I'll unpack a little bit further. Now, what has happened in the cybersecurity world because of this, many of the governments and many of the senior corporate cybersecurity organizations has come together. In the US, the National Institute for Standards and Technology, it's called NIST, has created a cybersecurity framework to combat this proliferation of malicious code in aid of early detection. And the framework ultimately recommends things like continuous real-time monitoring of electronic resources. Now, when we talk about how the industry sees cybersecurity, the industry approaches cybersecurity from a layered perspective. So there's a layered approach to cybersecurity. Now, if I unpack that from an analogy perspective, if you look at a home, and I'll probably use an example of a South African home, which is probably easiest to unpack. If you look at a home that is in a gated community, you'll have a big wall in the front of that, in front of the premises. That can be aligned to something, as you can see, like a firewall. Then you'll have the security guard. That will probably be your access to the environment. Once you get into the property, you'll see there'll be things like beams, or you'll have a dog on the property. When you get to the actual property itself, you'll have cameras, and then you'll have a security gate, and then behind the security gate, you'll have the mother-in-law that watches everything in the gated community. And then behind the mother-in-law, you'll have the people that have the keys to the different rooms in the house, and within the cupboards, the different assets or important items are kept in the safe or in those cupboards. Now, if you approach it from a cybersecurity perspective, cybersecurity covers technologies on multiple layers. Gone are the days when people talk of cybersecurity as a antivirus solution only. If I have an antivirus solution on my laptop, I'm secure. That's not the case. And the reason for that is because the threat actors they use multiple threat vectors to enter customers' environments. It'll be either through a malware or a ransomware attack. It can be a brute force attack. It can be, compromising privileged credentials in the customer's environment. So there are multiple levels of where the risks are in the environment. So that can be easily equated to the analogy that I painted to from a house perspective. So one of the things, when you're trying to understand the world of cybersecurity, you need to understand the threat. What is the threat? What does the threat want? So I've basically listed out here a list of the types of threat actors that are predominantly hitting the industries, from a hacking perspective. But what do these threat actors want? And what does it impact? It impacts something called the CIA triad. Now, the CIA triad is nothing to do with the Central Intelligence Agency. It's actually around confidentiality, integrity of your systems, and the availability of your systems. Any of these three, if any of these are compromised, it ultimately impacts the organization. So from a confidentiality perspective, if you look at a use case, if there's a bank that was breached and the customer's data was stolen, and that credit card information or any personal identifiable information was stolen, that is confidentiality that was impacted. If you look at integrity, integrity can be the integrity of the data or the integrity of the system. An example that I can talk about here is a very scary example, which has really happened in the Eastern European countries, where water filtration plants has been hacked. And water filtration plants don't actually have any personal identifiable information, but what they do have is the formula for palatable water. So what the hackers were trying to do was they were trying to change the integrity of that formula by upping the percentage of sodium hydroxide in water. Now, sodium hydroxide is used to kill bacteria. Now, if you up that percentage to a high, you can poison an entire populace. So that's the integrity of information, the integrity of a system that gets compromised. And then availability is when you have something like a denial of service attack, where the availability of your systems or your company systems is completely crippled. If you have a ransomware attack, there's no availability. You can't service your customers and your clients, and it has a detrimental effect to your organization. Now, let's talk about the threat actors.
Before we go on to the threat actors, I want to bring it a little bit closer to home, because I know one of the things you mentioned is availability.
Yes.
Would a case of a customer or a business that has a Instagram account being hacked by a hacker classify as availability? If that Instagram account is actually used to sell your products and run, would that be something that you could classify as an example of availability?
Yes, definitely. So anything that actually impacts how you do business. So it's in today's times, organizations have evolved. So they, from the smaller businesses, they leverage on these social media platforms as platforms for marketplaces and selling. Now, if that a mechanism for them doing their business is crippled, that availability of the system of their business is ultimately impacted.
Awesome, thank you.
Okay, so back to the threat actors. Now, what I've listed here is the common threat actors that are known. The very important one, if you see, you'll have something called a nation-state threat actor. Now, a nation-state threat actor, simply put, is countries that's hacking other countries. So you'll see a lot of examples in the news about this, where America is hacking Russia, and Russia is hacking Ukraine, and China is, those kind of scenarios. So the motivation is geopolitical. Now, cyber criminals is probably one of the most common ones that we see in South Africa that's been impacting us from a ransomware perspective, because their motivation is driven through greed, through profit. So they're about stealing your information, selling your information, where you need to pay them in Bitcoins. It's all about that is their motivation. Then you get hacktivists. Now, hacktivists are driven through ideological motivations. Now, these are like the Edward Snowdens of the world, WikiLeaks, Julian Assange, people that are trying to stick it to the big bad corporates or the big bad world, big bad governments, and, trying to share certain information to the populace, etc. So that's hacktivists. Then you get terrorist groups, and they're driven through ideological violence. They've got violent intent to destabilize certain target victims, etc. Then you have thrill seekers. This is also commonly referred to in the industry as script kiddies. These are people that hack for satisfaction. Like typically your younger generation, your students, or people that are trying to test the boundaries of their IT and their security knowledge. But they ultimately do evolve into cyber criminals at some point or the other. Then you have insider threats. Now, the insider threat is very interesting, because the insider threat is not only a discontent or a disgruntled employee. It can just be a normal employee that can inadvertently put your entire company at risk. So let me give you an example of this. You have a person that receives an email, which looks like a legit email from the CIO of the company, but the email was actually spoofed, and there's actually malicious malware or a phishing email or phishing links in those emails, and ultimately can compromise the entire business. So that is an example of that. Now, if we're looking at what the different types of mechanisms, there's things like malware. Malware is malicious. These are very common threats. You have viruses that proliferate and spread across the environments, malicious code. There's Trojans. Trojans are things like there's disguise, there's legitimate software, but cyber criminals trick users into uploading these Trojans. There's spyware. The information is being recorded. And what we commonly getting used to in the market is ransomware, where malware is used to lock down the user's files and data, and with the threat of erasing it unless a ransom is paid. So there are multiple different ways of things that these threat actors are using. An interesting one is also botnets, where networks of malware-infected computers cyber criminals use to perform online tasks without the user's permission. The interesting use case of this would be things like crypto mining. There's been a lot of cases where people's PCs have been compromised, where the machines have been used to mine crypto without their knowledge. So people are seeing that their servers are running slow, their resources are being consumed. That is because there were some cyber criminals that was actually hacking people's machines to mine crypto. So that is an interesting one to talk about.
So Garith, before we move on to why cybersecurity is important, if you're mentioning the case specifically around machines used to mine crypto, would that be the type of example of threats affecting a small business, particularly because there's less monitoring happening on their side versus a larger corporate that has a bit of bigger IT kind of resources? Can you talk to us a little bit more about that?
Yes, definitely. Because if you look at how things are structured in the corporate world, many of the small to medium-sized businesses don't have the deep resources from a technology perspective, from a knowledge capacity perspective to secure the environments. So they are ultimately a very big risk and threat. So hackers are targeting them because it's easy to compromise those environments. There's not a very big cybersecurity culture that is driven in these small to medium-sized businesses. They're ultimately a few years behind from a technology adoption perspective as well. So it's very easy for hackers to compromise them and to use them through either stealing the data or ransomware attacks, or like we mentioned, those ransomware, those crypto mining used from a resource on their PC and on their servers.
Cool. So talk to us a little bit more about why cybersecurity is important, and what are some of the just a little bit more about what cybersecurity, why it's so important, especially for a small business owner.
Yeah, I mean, there's been a number of things. Like I mentioned, over the last few years, cybersecurity has evolved. Security has moved away from being historically being seen as a cost center. Security has evolved to move beyond being a business enabler. It's actually a business imperative. And the cartoon that I'm showing on the slide basically is a picture that says 1,000 words, because cybersecurity, as you can say, is being called to the big boys table because it has become a C-level problem. It has become a business problem because of the impact that it has. Like you rightly mentioned, that the stat around 60% of small companies closing within 6 months of being hacked, it shows you the impact that cybersecurity has to organizations. Now, things that are driving the importance around this are also regulations, data regulations. So throughout the world, all the various countries are introducing various types of protection acts and data regulations. From a South Africa perspective, we have the POPIA Act. There's different cybersecurity acts, etc. So these are also catalysts for organizations that's driving them to ensure that they need to have some level of cybersecurity maturity in the environment in order to protect them, because if they're seeing things like fines, that ultimately hits organizations as well. One example of this that I can share with is in the US. There was a company called Target. Many people are familiar with Target. Target is a massive retailer to the likes, or larger than our macros and games, etc. So Target had a very public, very massive breach where all their customers' personal identifiable information was stolen. The company's environment was hacked. There was availability issues, and the fallout of this breach cost them in excess of around $30 to $40 million, but that wasn't the biggest impact that they had, because of the negative impact that it had to them as a business. The share price dropped significantly, and the losses reached in the excess of a couple of $100 million. So what that ultimately led to, the entire C-level was fired. The board basically replaced the CIO, the CISOs, the CFO, everyone was replaced. And there's a good example of how a cybersecurity breach has impacted an organization. And then the cost of the breach itself. I mean, IBM has done a study in South Africa where it says firms pay, it costs them around 48 million on average. This is the highest in 6 years, and it's growing. The impact of cybersecurity and the fallout of cybersecurity and not being prepared, it leaves many of the small organizations really in a critical state.
So, Garith, before we move into some of the attacks and potential solutions, if we just go back to the POPI Act, because what I read up is that if you don't have preventative measures and your business is found to be in breach of you fall victim to a cybersecurity attack through any means, malware, whatever the case may be, if there weren't sufficient preventative measures in place, you as a business owner will be fully liable, both from a legal and financial perspective. Is that correct?
That is 100% correct. I mean, South Africa with the POPIA Act has fines, so the data regulator would investigate a breach. And then also, when you are breached, part of the POPIA Act is that you need to inform your clients within a certain amount of time that there was a breach and that the information has ultimately been compromised. The GDPR, which is almost a carbon copy of the POPIA Act, is the same kind of examples of that, and that impact even reaches out to South Africa if you are dealing with EU type data, you are also basically you need to conform to the GDPR Act as well, and their fines are much steeper.
So if I'm a freelancer, just to make this again a bit more practical, if I'm a freelancer offering services to a business based in any country in Europe, and I store any of that information, I also have to ensure that I comply with GDPR 100%. Standards along with copy standards as well. Okay.
100%. Yeah. So, and just to say, same thing that has changed in the industry over the last 2 years is something called cyber insurance. Now, many organizations are taking out cyber insurance to protect them in the eventuality of a breach. But what's been happening is, as we're taking out cyber insurance, they've also been canceling a lot of the cyber insurance because the part of the fine print in the cyber insurances is that you need to prove that you have all the measures in place. The same like from a data regulation perspective, but probably more stringent from a cyber insurance perspective, is that you need to prove that you've done everything possible to secure your environment. You have all the different solutions, the right policy, behavior, all of these things you need to prove before an insurance claim can be paid out. And those kind of loopholes, if they find that you haven't done certain things, they'll use that as an example not to pay. So that is also an interesting dynamic that has changed the cybersecurity space as well. So just to touch, I'm going to touch quickly on this slide. So this slide here is talking about South Africa as a prime target. Now, this slide has actually, the information has changed slightly on the slide because this slide says South Africa is ranked number 8 to most vulnerable cyber attacks. That has actually changed. We moved down to number. So it's actually gotten worse in the last 2 years. So South Africa is really a prime target, an easy target for many of these threat actors. And we'll see that these hackers attack every 39 seconds. So, there's armies of these guys. It's not one particular group. There's a whole lot of different types of hackers out there. And you'll see from statistically, 43% of these attacks target small businesses. So they're really going after the low-hanging fruit for them, the easy victims from that perspective. Phishing emails contributes to 30% of these breaches. And again, this is just some cost analysis with regards to the costs of breaches is, $21,000 was the average breach cost to big companies, and only 14% of companies believe that they're prepared for cybercrime. That's really a scary statistic. And the world of cybersecurity is evolving, and organizations need to evolve much quicker in order to get in front of this barrage of breaches that's been happening.
So Garith,
yep.
It sounds like there's doom and gloom, but I think it wouldn't be a masterclass if we didn't take the expertise and say there are multiple attacks. It can affect businesses and can have detrimental impact, especially to a small business. Yes. There's certain ownership that's placed on an actual business owner. Talk to us about some practical security tips that align to the different layers of security in the form of helping our audience online and anybody that watches this afterwards on steps that they can take to start taking action and becoming more cybersecurity resilient.
Yes, no, definitely. What I did was I basically picked out 6 simple cybersecurity tips. There are much more in the world of cybersecurity, but I think these are a good starting points to look at from a best practice perspective, especially for the small businesses. So something as simple as use of strong passwords, ensuring that your passwords are not easily guessable. So changing your password immediately if you believe your account has been hacked, having strong unique passwords, changing your passwords frequently, having a frequent pattern of when you're changing your passwords, and prioritize the use of tools like password managers to avoid memorizing or writing down passwords, or vaults to ultimately store your passwords, because you'd be surprised in this day and age with all the information that's out there, people are still writing down passwords and on post-its and still leaving it under their keyboards. Those things are not gone away. So it's things like that. So to ensure that a cracked password is also not compromised, because the hackers have various tools to compromise really complex passwords. Also ensure that you use things like multi-factor authentication, two-factor authentication wherever possible. You'll see a lot of the banking apps has the use of multi-factor authentication as well. And these are important, simple steps from that perspective as well. Now, the use of a VPN is also very important, especially if you're utilizing things like public Wi-Fi, etc. You need to ensure that you are utilizing a virtual private network to give you an added level of privacy. And then ultimately, the third point talks to a cybersecurity culture. Inculcating a cybersecurity culture in your environment by, being consciously aware of the different threats out there and being conscious of what information you're using, what information you're accessing. Think before you click. So avoid downloading or clicking on unknown links or emails. Always double check if the emails come from a credible source. If somebody sends you an email from a Yahoo account that looks like odd, don't trust it. Always double check those kind of things. And when it comes to your devices, whether it is your routers, whether it is your peripheral devices, etc., ensuring that the most current software and updates is used on your systems, and from a network router perspective, the use of really good enterprise-grade solutions is important to give you that added bit of security as well, and making sure that you run things like antiviruses. It's important to run things like antiviruses, and it's important to run up-to-date software. And like I mentioned, the multi-factor authentication. Now, the reason why I touched on, the Wi-Fi, from a, why it's important to secure yourself when you're accessing public Wi-Fi is because here we encourage organizations, we encourage users not to just connect to free public Wi-Fi networks in public spaces, because unsecure networks leave you vulnerable to man-in-the-middle attacks. Now, the man-in-the-middle attack, simply put, is it's the type of cyber threat where a criminal intercepts the communication between two individuals in order to steal the data. So, for example, in an unsecure Wi-Fi network, an attacker could intercept data being passed through from a victim's device and the network. I myself, when I go to the airport, as an example, I don't even use the USB port that's in that next to the power plug to charge my phone, because if somebody to if of the data on my phone, etc. So it's kind of that kind of approach that I take to actually looking at things. But also, before I move on to this last point, very importantly is protecting the keys to the kingdom. For many organizations, you have things like your privileged credentials. Now, I come from a background of privileged access. Now, the privileged access management is important because things like your administrators, people that have access to the admin accounts, the root passwords, etc. This is the keys to the kingdom. When a hacker typically hacks your environment, statistically, they said that a hacker, it takes about 260 to 300 days for an organization to know that they were breached. So what that means is that when a hacker hacks your environment, it doesn't happen within a space of minutes. It's actually over a prolonged period of time. So when they're gaining access to your environment, they start moving around laterally, building up the different access, and start gaining access to where they want to go. It's called a kill chain. So they're ultimately moving on different levels, ultimately to the point of getting what they want to get. So it's very important that you secure things like your privileged credentials, encryption, security 101 is like encryption. Try and encrypt your data as best as possible using tools that encrypt your data at rest and in transit. So what that means is that you're encrypting your databases. You're also encrypting data when it's in transit. One other thing that organizations tend to neglect are simple things like your test and development environments as well. Organizations, you'll have a production server, and they'll have all the investments around security technologies on that production server. So it'll be encrypted. You'll have various tools securing that environment, but there is no tools being used to secure the test and dev environments. Now, the data that's on test and dev is production data. So people need to not neglect those kind of environments as well. Also ensuring that vulnerabilities are consistently looked at. So we're doing vulnerability scans in your environment. And I'll talk through that now in So I think on this, to the point of how we're at the point now where we want to talk about the how, right? How do we get to this point of creating a cybersecurity plan? Because and this needs to be something that keeps going. So simply put, creating a cybersecurity plan does not have to be complex. For a small business, it's not a thick 3-volume set of cybersecurity detailing, all the different steps. Simplistic steps to approach to building out your cybersecurity plan. Now, number one, the guidance that I would give is list your digital assets. So let me unpack what that means is. So in order to secure your environment, you need to know what's in your environment. So you need to know what computers, what assets, what mobile devices, what network infrastructure you have, what databases you have, and what customer information you have, and what software you're using. So when you list your digital assets, that's the starting point. So you know exactly what you have. The second point of guidance that I would give would be things like understanding and identifying your vulnerabilities. Malware, poor or non-existent encryption, like I mentioned, unsigned or unencrypted emails, weak credentials, not having good, strong password policies, misconfiguration, outdated or unpatched software, unsigned software as well, and employees' negligence and misconduct and poor security training. So what this is when you start identifying those vulnerabilities, when you know where all the risks are, where the gaps are in your environment, that's where you start building on that. So a lot of organizations start at this point as well, where they'll do things like vulnerability assessments. We'll do an assessment of the actual infrastructure, the assessment of the people as well, of the human behavior as well within your environment. Number 3, the third point in building out a cybersecurity plan would be to determine the compliance with the laws and regulations that you as an entity need to follow. So if you as a company are dealing with payment card information, you need to conform to the payment card industry standard, the PCI DSS. You need to conform to the POPIA Act. Like Nastassha mentioned, if you are doing any business in the EU and you are hosting any EU personal identifiable information, you need to conform to GDPR. So you need to know where you fit in as well. Number 4, I would say, create a risk assessment chart. So identify the most important aspects of your business, and ultimately knowing what the threat actor would be after. If your data, if your customers' personal identifiable information or credit card information is the crown jewels, then that is where you need to start securing. So you need to evaluate the risk level of all your things that your business face. And number 5, I would talk along the lines of outlining a security policy to mitigate risk. So making sure like you keep your software and operating systems up to date, encrypt your communications, sign and encrypt your emails with digital certificates, encrypt stored credentials, manage your employees' access to privileges, and train your employees. Now, what I have also here on the slides is the 5 key steps. So one thing that organizations fall into the trap of not knowing the difference between compliance and security. You need to understand the difference, because people are just looking at compliance to meet an auditory tick box, to make sure that their audit findings are all resolved. But they're confusing that with regards to an actual security plan, how you need to secure your environment. When I speak about things like cybersecurity culture, this is about making data security everyone's responsibility, because something as simple as a person that picks up a USB stick on the floor, just plugging it into the machine, that is bad and negligent behavior, and that could compromise an entire organization. And he plugs that thing in, and then malware proliferates across the environment, brings your organization down from an availability perspective. The hackers are stealing the information from a confidentiality perspective, and within 6 months, businesses are going bust. So this is why, the human element is very important. So making sure data security is everyone's responsibility. People need to be conscious of how they interact with information, how they're sharing information on emails. If they, if you have confidential information or secret information within your organization, you need to make sure that proper processes and policies are followed, where people can't email or copy that data out of your organization. Know your enemy. That also goes back to my point around creating the risk assessment chart. So you understand what your enemy would typically want, and then you typically understand, what your enemy needs and what your enemy wants to accomplish. And then around the outlining of the security policies, one important thing as well is around access, around the account for the roles of your cloud vendors and your ISPs. This is when I talk about third-party vendor access. We've seen a lot of examples where breaches happen, where you have third-party contractors that have access to your systems, and once they VPN onto your environment, they have full carte blanche access into your environment. This is a huge risk as well. So you need to make sure that you close those holes as well, and then have a plan for when you are breached. And this comes to my last point. Build your plans. So when you are building out a cybersecurity plan, you need to build an incident response plan. You need to have a business continuity plan, and you need to have a disaster recovery plan. These are very important things, and these are also things that the data regulator looks at as well. The insurance providers looks at these kind of things as well. And it also assists organizations to have a quicker recovery period in the eventuality of a data breach or a compromise in the environment. So these are some of the things that I would talk about, that I would guide with regards to building out that cybersecurity plan in your environment. So this is my last slide. My last slide basically just talks about us as Vodacom, the way we assist our customers around building this digital resilience from the inside out. Now, when we talk about securing from the inside out, it's very important, because you need to secure according to your cybersecurity plan, exactly what's happening in your environment from the inside out. So our vision is to help you along that journey and assist organizations in navigating this digital landscape, and especially now in the scary world of cybersecurity, to ensure as best as possible to ensure that we're protected. I always advise my customers that there's no silver bullet for security. It's like I mentioned, it's always a case. It's a case of when, not if. But you need to try as best as possible to try all measures to ensure that your organization is protected, to ensure that your data is protected, and to ensure that your users are protected as well. So Nastassha, over to you if there's any further questions.
Oh, thank you for that, Garith. I think you covered quite a few topics, and I can understand if everybody that's dialed in is slightly intimidated. But the one thing that I just want to caution everybody against, right? Guys, remember, Garith has got 20 plus years worth of experience within this space, and it is impossible in a very short masterclass for him to share and impart all of that knowledge. And that's why on our side, we want to ensure that all of this information is accessible to you guys in little bite-sized chunks, so you can always refer back to it afterwards. So if there aren't any questions on your side, I just glanced over at the chat and I can't see any questions available, but there has been quite a few topics covered, all the way from explaining the different layers of security, the types of security attacks. So what we will do on our side is to support you on your cybersecurity journey as you start taking your business from where it is right now and making sure that you are cybersecurity compliant. We've got a platform called VHub, which is a free knowledge and advice platform for any small business, whether you're a Vodacom customer or not a Vodacom customer, because it covers such important topics that this type of information you can't keep it hidden. The more people are well aware of what cybersecurity is, its advantages, and can start taking action, the safer we are as we all transform, to become more digitally transformed businesses and become future fit. So what we will share with you guys is the link to VHub. But if you do just want to Google it, you can search Vodacom VHub. And there's a category on the actual platform itself called cybersecurity and data analytics. This exact masterclass will be available within the next day or two on the platform. But even if you go there today, there's articles that you can engage with around why cybersecurity is important for your business. So if there are topics you want to share with your employees, business partners, or even if you just want to digest this content yourself, that is available. We also talk about how you can protect your business from cybersecurity and fraud risks, and a couple of detailed solutions around email spoofing, spyware, all of the terminology that seems quite foreign is there to assist you on your journey. But Garith, thank you so much for covering this topic as well. I loved the detail. I loved how much detail we actually got into during the session itself. And yeah, I look forward to joining you guys at the next session. We do have our next masterclass on Thursday, the 27th of October, and this one will be from 10 to 11 in the morning, where we will be joined with our guests from Everlytic. And basically, Everlytic is a company that offers email marketing solutions. So we'll get into all the nuts and bolts around why email marketing is quite an important part of your digital marketing strategy and how you can leverage this to help grow your business. But yes, really looking forward to joining you guys for all the future masterclasses, and thank you so much for dialing in.